Hey, Sens fans, welcome to today's episode where we're joined by a special guest here, Graeme Nichols. You can find Graeme writing about the Sens on his Substack blog, Rome in a Day, which we'll include a link to in the description so you can check it out. Give it a read. And Graeme, thank you again for joining us for what, like a third or fourth time now we've had you on.
Yeah, no problem. It's always fun to come back, and yeah, there's been a lot of stuff that's happened over the past like 14 days, so there's plenty of stuff to get into.
Yeah, I thought it was a pretty ideal time to have you on. Lots to talk about. Definitely a lot of news surrounding Pierre Dorion, obviously being the main one that the news cycle has turned to, and he's parted ways with the organization, and he has been with the organization for a really long time. I think, God, going back to like what mid 2000s.
Yeah, 2007, I
Yeah, I
believe.
was gonna say I thought it was 2006, 2007. And for the last 8 years, he's been the general manager of the Sens. So that's quite some time. Long tenure for a GM in the NHL. So basically, I wanted to get down to it. What are your thoughts on his tenure as a GM? I know you wrote about it a bit already, but what did you think of his tenure, and what's your evaluation on that and the legacy that he's really left for himself now?
Well, I'll start with the good. Obviously, I think he deserves credit for drafting a lot of good young players in this organization. I think it goes all the way back to like Eric Carlson, 2008, and then Mark Stone 2010, all the way through like Brady Tkachuk, Jake Sanderson, Tim Stützle, Thomas Chabot. Obviously, like he's found some good value in the mid first round at times. And regardless of what you think of the general manager, you got to give him credit where some credit's due. And in many of these cases and instances, he's been able to extend these players. I know, like, some naysayers might say, well, they're restricted free agents coming off their ELCs, their entry level contracts, so they don't necessarily have a ton of leverage in these negotiations. But I think, especially in the case of Brady Tkachuk, when everything's going south, Mark Stone, his mentor and roommate, was just jettisoned to Vegas. It would have been really easy for Brady Tkachuk to sit there and say, you know what, screw this. I'm going to ride out the rest of the my years of team control. Give me a bridge deal. That's all I'm going to sign. And after that, I'm not promising anything. And he didn't do that. He signed a long-term extension. I have no idea why. And I tweeted this, or I X'd this in a post online. But like, I think that's probably one of the greatest untold stories that we haven't really heard in great
Mm,
length and detail. And I hope it's a story that we get to hear at some point, because he I don't think anyone would have blamed him in that dark time in franchise history. Like Eugene Melnick was still alive. The team was kind of swirling the drain quite frequently, and it would have been really easy for him to say, you know what, I'm out. Sorry, guys. And he's an American player, so I like, not that there's anything wrong with American players and their loyalty issues to Canadian franchises or anything. I think like lots of American players have had long, successful careers in Canada, but I think it would have been really easy for him to say, you know what, I'm out. And I don't think anyone would have blamed him for it, but he didn't do that. He kind of set the bar for guys like Jay Sanderson, Tim Stützle, Josh Norris, Drake Batherson to sign some long-term deals of their own. And it's kind of positioned the team well. I know this year there's been a cap crunch, but I think if you look at the escalating nature of the salary cap over the next few years, I think this team's set up well, like 2-3 years down the line. I know nobody wants to really talk about 2 or 3 years down the line, but eventually you're going to have some huge cap savings and cap flexibility with these guys making like $7-8 million bucks. Where, like long-term extensions are probably going to go for like 10, 12, 13 million. So there is the opportunity for a lot of savings, and there's a lot of opportunity down the road to augment the roster and kind of complement this young core that the organization has built. And I think for that, I think you have to tip your hat to Pierre Dorion. And saying that, I think that's the only good. Unfortunately, like I've highlighted his missteps throughout the years. I think, for gutting a roster, as much as Ottawa did fall in that 2017 Eastern Conference final run, the team had an embarrassment of riches in terms of draft pick compensation for all these trades that they made, and they left a lot of value on the draft room table, or on the draft room floor, I should say. And guys like Scott Wheeler and stuff got panned by fans who just wanted to hear that everything was fine, the sky's blue, everything else. And it turned out that, like, like aside from Ottawa's top 5 picks, and I shouldn't just say the top 5 picks, but like Shane Pinto was a good find early in the second round when he was taken. Drake Batherson was a good mid-round find. There has been some value, but considering the volume of picks that Ottawa's had, they didn't add enough over the rebuild years. I think like it kind of shows itself a little bit, especially like going back to like this offseason, where it's like you don't have guys who can step in and play. I think really Greg was another good one, and he stepped in and he played at a high level this season before he got hurt. But like, there's a reason why the organization's going out and getting one-year stopgap guys like Vladimir Tarasenko and Dominik Kubalik, right? There isn't that high skill internal option, who also would have been inexpensive. And I think that's one of the other considerations that hasn't really been talked about, is that this organization routinely sent draft picks out and draft currency out to bring in ineffective veterans like Derek Stepan, Matt Murray. They rolled the dice and gambled on Alex DeBrincat, and it didn't work out. And I don't mind the Senators taking a risk, but when trades like that don't work out and you're bringing in a guy who has no allegiance to this organization and you're just kind of going by on a whim without even being allowed to talk to the player to find out if he has any interest in playing in Ottawa, that's a huge gamble. And it blew up in his face. And the only person, unfortunately, you can blame for that is the general manager. And he has to own that. And I think that's kind of like his legacy. He's burned through a number of assets. And just, like all the proponents of Dorion over the years, when all the apologists will say, well, he worked for a really hard owner. And I don't think anybody in the world would envy the position that he was in, having to work for Eugene Melnyk. But, I think as time goes by, and especially after his passing, I think there's still mistakes being made that he has to kind of own. Like, it was kind of like a get out of jail card free for him, where he could do whatever he wants and nobody bats an eye because the Melnyk factor and the fact that his top 5 picks and Tim Stützle, Brady Tkachuk, and Jake Sanderson have played really well.
Yeah, I think you make a lot of really good points, Graeme. I agree that I think so much of Dorion's legacy is going to be tied up in what this young core that he drafted and locked up can do. And for that, we're going to have to wait and see over the course of a few years. But I am curious. I mean, you mentioned a few of, Dorion's, mistakes or missteps, however you want to characterize it. Is there one that you think is going to haunt this team more than any other one? What was like the biggest blunder that he made in his 8 years as GM, in your opinion?
Oh, I think it's almost like death by 1,000 cuts.
Right.
Like whether you're talking about like Mark Stone for Brandstrom in a 2nd-round pick, whether you're talking about Mika Zibanejad in a 2nd-round pick, being dealt for Derek Brassard, you're giving away like very valuable players, and you're getting short-term results. And I think like one of the legacies of Dorion, whether it's a signing or a trade, one of the problems with him is that the guys that he's acquired haven't spent a long time here. Like, you look back at like even guys like Dadonov and stuff, he played one season, was dealt immediately. And I don't know if that's because he had like a backdiving contract and since wanted that $11 million off the books, but like he's got a history of signing guys to contracts. Zach Smith's another. He signs him to a contract and he's like, oh, that was a bad idea. Gotta get rid of him. I think Nikita Zaitsev was a terrible acquisition. It's just death by 1,000 cuts. I think listening to his coaching staff for player personnel decisions was absolutely horrible. I feel like he didn't learn anything from the Guy Boucher era, where he's going out and acquiring guys like Nate Thompson, Taylor Pyatt, and it's just after Boucher got fired, he acknowledged it was a problem. He's like, that's never going to happen again. And then DJ Smith walks in the door, and next thing you know, Connor Brown and Zaitsev are coming in the door, and Connor Brown's a good player, but maybe not good enough to take on the Zaitsev contract,
or Josh Brown for that matter.
Josh Brown's another.
Yeah.
Travis Hamonic had the allegiances with Capuano. Like, it just goes on and on and on. And part of that I think is a function of the fact that they had one of the smallest front offices in hockey. But at the same time, it's like, if you have one of the smallest front offices in hockey, what's the cheapest, most effective thing you can do to make things better? It's probably to hire and create an analytics department that you can, essentially fund at the cost of a few AHL seasoned veterans. It's like you can get more bang for your buck doing that, and they never really wanted to do that. And I don't know, it's like, I don't know whether it's just Dorion thinking like he didn't need the help or he didn't want the help or what have you, but it's nice to see the organization finally like starting to beef up their hockey ops department under Michael Anlander. So it's good in that sense, but I don't know if there's like one particular move that stands out. I know one of the ones that always kind of bothered me was like the Matt Duchene trade, just because even though they were coming off their 2017 Eastern Conference final run, I think like if you recognize that Mark Mathot was gone and replaced with Johnny Oduya, they lost Clark MacArthur, like they lost like very valuable quality high-end depth guys, and they replaced them with shit. Pardon the language, but like they replaced them with nothing, and then they get off to a terrible start, and it's like, wow, we need Matt Duchene. It's like, well, he's not earned years of team control, so you're sending out a significant opportunity cost for another short-term solution that might not necessarily, and it kind of extends to the DeBrincat thing. They took the same kind of gamble there, but like, I don't mind them taking that risk later on, but again, it's like if those moves don't work out, you have no one to blame but the general manager, and he's got to own that. And it's just, to me, it's death by 1,000 cuts. But it's death by 1,000 cuts. But like the guys that they were acquiring or moving out of the lineup were like significant assets who turned it.
Yeah, I think again, really good points. It's just there's so many just mistakes and missteps over the years that all accumulated to the team. As we're seeing at this point, at this early stage of the season, not being as far ahead as everyone thought and expected they would be. But closing the door on Dorion and looking to the future, then, the Sens have an opportunity here to go out and acquire a new general manager, perhaps for the first time in 15, 20 years. They have the financial backing and the organizational clout to bring in someone good, somebody coveted by other teams. And so there's a lot of names that are being thrown around as possible replacements. But we want to ask, what do you want to see in the next GM, regardless of who it ends up being?
As long as the person's smart, as long as they have experience building like a hockey operations department from scratch. I think if you look at Ottawa staff, it's still relatively bare bones. I know they hired like Sean Tierney and stuff, but like in the modern NHL, you look at what organizations like Seattle, Vegas, New Jersey, what they've done. They're hiring data analysts. Colorado is another one. Like they're hiring data analysts and computer science people to augment the data and kind of like separate the noise from what's valuable. And I think Ottawa's got to do the same thing. I think like obviously Sean Tierney's here, and that's a great hire, a great guy, very personable, knows his stuff, but like he needs help. One person can't handle like a gigantic workload. I think that you need an army. You need like an army of database gurus who can just like parse the noise and separate the noise from what's quality information, and use that information to augment what your scouts are telling you. And so like I don't know, like I don't mind. I appreciate the concerns from people who say like, well, Steve Stais doesn't have a lot of NHL experience, so they need to get an experienced hand, and that's totally fine. I think that's a very valid and reasonable point. But at the same time, it's okay because like a guy like Peter Chiarelli is available. Like, what has he done? What has he done? Like, what kind of background and experience does he have in building what you want, or what you want to get to? What's desirable? Like, what's your end goal? And I think there's a bunch of I'd almost prefer if the organization went and targeted like really smart AGMs who've been part of a building process, who might not necessarily get the opportunity in their organizations to kind of like lead it anytime soon. I think if there's an opportunity to go ahead and bring someone in from New Jersey or Colorado or Dallas or Vegas. Well, Vegas is interesting after what just happened.
Let's maybe pump the brakes on them, but
that'd be an interesting wrinkle. But like there's tons of quality candidates out there, and I think like if you're talking about from an inclusivity standpoint, there's a lot of female candidates out there too who could be interesting as well.
Yeah, and one of the ones that it would be really interesting to see, and some people have mentioned them as a coaching hire, but I personally really like their analysis and would like them as a special advisor to the Sens, and that would be Cheryl Pounder. I think that she would be really great in some sort of front office advisory role, just because of how she analyzes the game is, just I don't know. There's a lot of detail to it, a lot of understanding, and
sure.
I find that you don't get that from as many analysts. Like other than the ones who have played in the NHL, right? And obviously she has hockey experience, so that helps. But
there was a rumor years ago, and I don't know if you guys remember this or recall this, but there was one season at the end of the season, Dorion was asked about having like a more diverse front office, and he mentioned that they had talked to a female candidate, and I was led to believe that it was her. Obviously that never came to fruition. I can't remember what year it was, but it was like I would say the last like 3 years. Okay. But there was. You can go down the well on Google. I'm sure you can come across it, but I was led to believe that it was her. Why someone would choose to take a job while Eugene Melnyk is still alive and Dorion's run the ship, I don't know, and maybe that's ultimately what she decided, because she's got a very successful career at TSN doing broadcasts. So maybe she just said, you know what, not for me at this time, but maybe that's something that they could revisit down the road.
And it's also one of those things where like Cheryl Pounder's pretty loved universally in the Ottawa broadcast community and like as Sens fans, and that's why everybody who says, "Oh, Alfie should be the next coach," it's no, because that is a very fireable position. Yeah, exactly. And the last thing you want to do is fire Alfie.
Yeah,
exactly. keeping
Yes.
him in that ambassador role, so he's just
Exactly.
here and
Yeah.
he's happy, right?
Let him
Yeah.
go out and do puck handling skills as much as he wants, but do
Yeah.
not put him behind the bench because it could go badly.
Alfie's only job should be vibes, nothing
Yeah.
else. Nothing that could
His vibes
require
for
him to
60
ever
are
be
just like
released. Yeah.
And I think bringing in the best possible candidates is obviously the right way of doing things. And I think Friedman had said on his most recent 32 Thoughts that basically you won't see another candidate from another team leave for another job during the season because they want to like fulfill their requirements with that team. And that obviously takes a lot of people off the board. Guys like Matthew Darsh, Eric Tulsky, even Peter Chiarelli for that matter. So I think the GM search to me isn't as important as it is the coaching position that we will be talking about at some point. But I would say one of the most hot button things coming out of Ottawa right now was versus the Tampa Bay Lightning. And that's Brady Tkachuk's comments about the fans booing and how he saw it as bullshit. Do you think that his frustration at Sens fans is justified? And would you also, on that flip side, say the Sens fans' frustration is justified?
I think it's just a matter of all the parties are frustrated. I don't think there's anything wrong with fans voicing their opinions. They're paid customers. They can voice whatever they want at games within reason. Obviously, I mean, there's certain restrictions that you never want to go into. I think like George LaRock got into that, talking about some of the minor hockey stuff that's going on in Canada. So yeah, I get where he's coming from, but I think he's doing a positive for his coach. I think he's deflecting blame. He's bringing all the attention on himself, and that's what a captain should do. He's taking the heat off his coach because it is a very pressing time. Like these games matter right now. The team's like 1-5 in their last 6 games. They're last place in the Atlantic Division. They're last place in the Eastern Conference. They're where nobody anticipated them being, and it's an incredibly frustrating time. And I think the fans are equally frustrated, and they're allowed to voice their concerns. And you know, is it a challenge for him? Is it a challenge for the fans to get up and be absolutely supportive of everything that's going on? And no, it's fair to assume that like players that have their own frustrations with what's going on, and fans are entitled to that position as well. But I don't think Brady saying the fans are what their treatment of everything is bullshit. I think it's just deflection. I don't honestly believe he feels that way. You know, they're all paying supporters, so it is what it is. I'm not too concerned about that, and I don't think fans are gonna be angry at him for saying his comments. And if they are, they should probably relax. It's just one of those situations where he's deflecting blame and putting the attention on himself.
I think also it's probably the fact that there's been a lot of home games early on in the schedule for the Sens. So I think the fans who are going numerous times, you know, the recurring fans, season ticket holders, what have you, obviously those numbers have increased quite a bit over the last couple of years. So you're seeing fans who are going to the building and they're likely seeing this night after night. And so then you're adding up the cost of tickets, the cost of, you know, getting the car ride out there, or even just the cost of your time, right? And I think that also adds into it, and people are just frustrated because they see sloppy passing, they see, you know, sloppy defensive play, and I think that all builds on it. And then because you don't have that break from the team, you're constantly seeing this, you're just dissatisfied and you just get fed up. And I think that probably doesn't help, and that, you know, them going to Sweden and being out of town for a few weeks allows maybe Sens fans to be able to cool their jets, and maybe the team needs that break from Ottawa and they go out and hopefully they can repeat what they did in Sweden last time, but we'll forget about what happened afterwards.
Yeah. Sorry, Ben, go ahead, man.
No, I was just going to say one other factor I think as well is that this is perhaps the first time that in a while that Sens fans have had genuine hope for the long-term prospects of this team. You know, like every month that passes post Melnyk, you know, you're seeing more positive moves made, whether it's, you know, things like getting rid of Dorion, whether it's things like hiring Sean Tierney, bringing in more, you know, front office staff. And I think it's like, as that happens, expectations are also rising. And I feel like 2 years ago, you would have seen fans booing the team in the same way, because it was like, you know, we were in the doldrums, we were circling the drain, like you said. It's like, you know, no one expected to be good. No one expected good things to happen to the Senators. Now we do, which is a positive thing. But I think that now you're seeing a gap between the expectations for the team and the realities of the team that perhaps, I mean, like there was always, people always every season come in expecting the team to be better. But I think now there's kind of like a genuine expectation of like, okay, now there's no excuse. You have a new owner, you have money, you have backing, things have to be better. And I think that's what we're seeing is the reaction to, it's like before you could boo all you want, Melnick would just, flip you the bird and just do whatever he was doing. Now you get the impression that like, I think fans feel like if we boo enough, they'll fire DJ and get a good coach. I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing as well.
Yeah, I think fans also want to see some progression from the players, right? Like I think offensively, I think you've seen that natural progression from the good young players, but at the same time, it's been a number of years and you're still seeing the same defensive mistakes being made, and just, they're glaring. It's obvious anytime you watch this team defend in the own zone, and they constantly, when they're playing the best teams in the league, who have speed and the ability to rotate, it gives them problems. And there's just, I wouldn't say there's no accountability, but it's just it's amazing how quickly their structure breaks down defensively as soon as they get running around in their own end. And I think one of the problems, and like Megan Chayka from Stackleys made the post about like the constant dump ins, and if you look at Ottawa, they're one of the highest defenders for dumping the puck in and chasing. And if you look at their expected goal rate off these dump ins, it's not very high. So they're playing a style that isn't necessarily conducive to success. And, obviously there's a lot more that goes into it. When you're just talking about dump ins, there's context. Like, are they going off on a change because the players are tired and they're just going off? Or is this just an actual offensive strategy? And I think one of the questions that you can ask is, does the team have the personnel to effectively play that kind of style? I think if you look at a team like Carolina, that's like one of the fastest teams in the league. Like, they have the personnel to make that successful, and that's a front office that's their approach. They're going to dump and chase, and they're going to beat you that way. In Ottawa, they've acquired a bunch of guys who are more like trigger men, who aren't necessarily the fastest guys on the ice. And I think you can honestly ask that question: does the team have the personnel to play the style? And if the answer is no, then you have to ask, like, what are we doing here? Like, at what point do you start changing philosophies and start adapting your style to fit the personnel that you have? And I think in Ottawa, like, they've been comfortable to play high event hockey for the last like 8, 9, 10 years, and it hasn't really worked. I think, when's the last time Ottawa had one of the best defensive teams in the league? You're going.
I don't think Ottawa has ever had one of the best defensive teams.
You're going back to like the early 2000s when Jacques Martin was there.
Yeah.
And it's been like 20 years, and I like a function of that. It's not having a good defense. Like, they haven't had a good defense since probably like 2006, but it's eventually the excuses have to stop, and you just have to take aim and say, listen, like, it's entertaining as hell to watch like 6-4 games, 5-3 games, but like, come playoff time, are you going to be able to play that style and have success? And I think if you look at teams like Toronto, the answer is no. Like, you have to be able to go to the hard areas and play that kind of gritty style. Like, it's obviously having skill matters, and having a great power play and special teams matters in the postseason. But if you can't score dirty goals and play hard, and Sean Simpson, I believe it was him on the other day, it's just like, you know what, this team's soft. They're not hard to play against, and more often than not, I think that holds true a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think the point about the dump and chase is you hit the nail on the head. Our personnel don't fit the style of dump and chase hockey, and we can all sit here and recognize that in that particular game where it was a glaring issue, we could all see that LA was just rope-a-doping us with pulling it back, waiting for it to come to them, and then just continuously doing the same thing. And there was just no adjustment. And, that always is going to come down to the coach. And with DJ, it sounds like he has Staios's his stamp of approval for the time being. But like, what do you see as the future for DJ Smith? And do you think he has a chance in gaining back the trust of the fan base, or do we just cut bait here and call it a day?
Well, I mean, like, they've had success down the stretch, right? As the games become less important, the team goes on a bit of a run. So like last year, they have like 93 points by the end of the year. Like, they weren't far removed from the postseason for the first time in history. And like, I think you have seen that natural progression, but I think the question is, it's like, well, is that just because the young players who were drafted really high were organically growing and getting better themselves, or is this a function of a head coach who knows what he's doing and is getting the most out of this team? And I think watching this team play like regularly, I feel like this team has another gear in them, and they just, for whatever reason, they can't get there consistently. And I don't like, I concur with Brady and Staios. I don't think this is a question of like the guy's not working hard for DJ. I just think it's more a matter of like, are they working smart? Are they playing a structured game? Because when you're constantly chasing the game, it sure looks like you're working hard, but if the results aren't there, it doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like at a point you've given up 38 shots, 40 shots, 38 shots, and you're always playing from behind. You're always trailing. You're always trying to score and tie it up. But at a point, you just need to realize that whatever structure you think you might have, like hell, even a circle is a structure. There's just like, there's not a lot going on with DJ's system that brings confidence to the fan base. At least for me, like I've not liked anything that he has put out there before January, and before January is almost half of the season. And like once we're at that point, like I read that Staios is going to let this go until the absolute last possible time. And I'm like, that is in 4 games. Like, in my opinion, you have Anaheim going on a 6-game winning streak that could get them into the postseason.
The Western Conference is terrible, though. Come on.
This is very true. But at the same time, like, we were supposed to be jumping on the opportunities that Tampa Bay lost their starting goalie, and they were supposed to be, all of these teams were supposed to not do as well as we were. And we, like, even with the injuries that we have, we still have a much better team than most of the time that we've had. It's just a very frustrating conversation that I feel like we've had the last 3 years in a row at around this point, that it's just like, what are we doing here?
Yeah. And I think like one of the team's biggest weaknesses coming into the season was like the two-way play of its forwards. Like losing Ridley Gregg, he was fantastic in those stretches. He was probably the best defensive forward, which is insane to say as a rookie who's like 10 games into his career this season. And then like not having Shane Pinto on the ice with this young core is just, I think that was a fireable offense in its own. Obviously, there's some stuff going on in the background that we haven't talked about either. But like not having those guys on the ice has been a huge blow to the quality of depth at the bottom of the lineup. And I think if you bring in guys like Tarasenko, who's had a nice start offensively, he's finishing the chances and he's setting up the chances that he gets when he's on the ice. But like, he's not a great defensive player. Dominic Kubalik is not a great defensive player. And the guys that you brought in kind of exacerbate the weaknesses of the roster. And like, had the organization gone out this summer, traded Matthew Joseph to create the cap room to sign Shane Pinto, I think like the quality of depth at the bottom of this lineup would have been just decimated. And, it's a predicament that hasn't gotten better. And it's, like there's a light at the tunnel. I don't want to like dump on the Senators too much, because like I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I think like the fact that there's genuine optimism after the team fired Pierre Dorion and lost a first-round pick for their role in the Evgeny Dadonov thing is just, the fact that there's optimism after that's kind of crazy. And I think that's telling for how the last few years have gone. But I think there is light at the tunnel. I think there's, they're hiring the right people. They're building the front office. They've hired Sean Tierney. They're putting checks and balances in place so they can make more informed decisions. And I think it's only going to get better. It's just a matter of who's going to be the next general manager. How long can you afford to wait on this head coach? And, if I think the question that Steve Staios has to be asking himself right now is like, if this isn't the long-term coach 2 months from now, 3 months from now, next season, why is he still here? And in fairness, maybe he wants to bring in his own general manager. And as you stated, if certain individuals aren't allowed to lead their organizations till the end of the season, maybe it's a decision that I'll have to wait till the off season, unfortunately. But I mean, if there's a credible and excellent head coach available now, who can right the ship and help improve things, Steve Staios is the president of hockey operations. The general manager has to answer to him. So if Steve Staios has his own idea of who would be a great addition to this organization, then I think he's empowered to make that call now.
So even with like all the injuries that Ottawa's endured, on paper, despite the fact that they don't have a ton of defensive forwards right now, they still have a roster that can get wins. Like on paper, I don't think anyone would argue that they don't have the talent to win games. They definitely do. So, do you chalk that up to them, their strengths and weaknesses being more so on the players and how they play, or do you chalk that more up to the fact that coaching is like a factor in this? And I know Matt touched on it earlier with dump and chase not quite being the style that Ottawa is suited for, and you mentioned how it's been talked about that the Sens are soft, and so if they're soft and dumping and chasing isn't their forte because they don't have that heavy forecheck, then does that fall on the coach instead? So, do you think it's just mostly on the players right now, on the coaching?
It's probably a bit of both. But I mean, like, if you look at the Senators' underlying goal and shot metrics, they're bottom third of the league in shots generated, shots on goal generated, expected goals for generated. Like, they're 27th in the league in expected goals for. The reason why they've had success and they've won 4 games early is because of their offense. Like, they've got like the 5th highest shooting percentage in the league, and they have so much individual skill and so many guys who should be like stars. Like I forget whose model it was. Byron Bader.
Byron Bader, yeah.
Yeah, it's like his model had the Senators as having like 6 or 7 stars, and I don't disagree. Like there's a ton of just talent on this roster. It's just a matter of like, how do you get more out of it? I think it goes back to our conversation. Like, how do you make this team better? It's probably to get them to play a better 2-way game, because that individual skill and offense will take care of itself. It's just a matter of getting these guys to defend as a unit collectively. And I think that's going to pay dividends, and they need saves. That was the other part of it. Like, their save percentage is 91.24 at 5-on-5, but like, that's almost 20th in the league. So things can get better. It's just the unfortunate problem is they're also riddled with injuries. I think they get Artem Zoo back hopefully hopefully Wednesday. But after that, like, Shabbat might still be like 5-6 weeks away. So it's troublesome. They got these injuries, and Shane Pinto's gone for 40, well, fewer than 40 games, 30 games, 31 games. So
a lot of games.
They're gonna get help. They're gonna get help back at some point, but by the time they get help back, it might be too late.
Yeah.
Pinto might be their trade deadline ad.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you, Graeme, for joining us tonight. That went by pretty quick, but we always appreciate your insight, and we love hearing your takes on stuff. Now, is there anything you want to plug before we call it a night here?
No, not really. I just wrote about Dorion's legacy on the blog this afternoon, so that's available if people want to read it. You can find it at gnichols.substack.com. You can find me on X or Blue Sky. Just use my name, and you'll find me, Graeme Nichols, GraemeNichols. So if you search those, you'll find me.
Cool. Well, thank you again, Graeme, and hopefully we'll see you at another game around soon.
Sounds good. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks for your
so
time.
much,
Take
Graeme.
care.
Yeah, no worries.